with a really jarring contradiction from one of our sources today, Anthony Thiselton. We all know the opening line of 1 Corinthians 13. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. We've heard it at 1,000 weddings. We just assume we know what it means. If you don't have love, you're just making an annoying noise. You're out of tune.
Right. That is the standard reading. You're just a bad musician, essentially.
But Thiselton stops us cold right there. He digs into the archaeological record and the writings of a Roman architect named Vitruvius to argue that the phrase Paul uses here, chalkos ochen, might not be referring to a musical instrument at all.
This is where the history gets fascinatingly specific, because we have to look at how ancient theaters were actually built.
We're talking about massive amphitheaters, right? Stone, open air, thousands of people in the audience.
Exactly. And they obviously didn't have electricity, no microphones, no PA systems. So if you are an actor on stage or an orator, how do you get your voice to the guy in the cheap seats at the very top of the bowl without completely destroying your vocal cords?
I always just assumed the architecture itself did the heavy lifting, the shape of the bowl catching the sound.
That's part of it, sure. But Vitruvius, writing his architectural handbooks, describes a piece of high-tech audio engineering for the time. They would cast these massive bronze vessels, sometimes earthenware, but the high-end ones were bronze, and they were tuned to specific musical intervals. They would place these jars in niches between the seats, strategically spaced around the auditorium.
So these were like passive amplifiers.
Essentially, yes. They were acoustic resonators. When the sound waves from the stage hit the bronze, the jar would vibrate. It would resonate. It took the sound, amplified it, and projected it with this booming quality. It added volume and resonance to the human voice.
Okay, so if we map that onto Paul's metaphor in verse 1, if I speak with tongues but have not love, I am a resounding bronze.
Exactly. Chalkos ochen. Sounding bronze.
Which completely changes the insult. He isn't saying you are an annoying cymbal player. He's saying you are a piece of theater equipment.
It is devastating when you think about the implications. An acoustic jar has no voice of its own. It's hollow. It's empty. It only works when something else puts sound into it. It amplifies, it projects, it makes things louder and, frankly, more impressive, but it has absolutely no soul. It has no life.
You are all volume, no content.
Precisely. And for the Corinthians, who were just obsessed with rhetoric, with volume, with making a massive splash in the assembly, this would have been a direct hit to the ego. Paul is telling them, you think your spiritual gift of tongues makes you a superstar. Without love, you are just a hollow echo chamber. You're a tool. You're a piece of bronze furniture.
That is a brutal way to open a chapter that we usually associate with, sock-focused photography and wedding bouquets. But that really sets the table for what we are doing today. We are doing a deep dive into 1 Corinthians 13, but we are stripping away the sentimental veneer. We are looking at this text through the eyes of 3 heavyweight scholars to understand the theology of love as a weapon against spiritual arrogance.
It really is a weapon. It's a polemic disguised as a poem.
Before we get into the verse by verse, let's orient ourselves. We are in the middle of Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. This is a church that is, frankly, a dumpster fire of problems.
That is the technical theological term, yeah.
We've had lawsuits, incest, arguments about meat sacrifice to idols, arguments about hats, and now in chapters 12, 13, and 14, we are right in the middle of a section on spiritual gifts.
Right, the pneumatica. The things of the Spirit.
Chapter 12 was about the body. We all have different gifts, but we are one body. Chapter 14, which we will get to next time, is about order in the service. Prophecy is better than tongues because it's intelligible. But then right here in the middle, we have this chapter on love. And I have to ask, is this a digression?
It definitely feels like one, doesn't it?
It does. It feels like Paul just got tired of arguing about church politics and decided to write a hymn, like he needed a commercial break.
That is exactly how it is often preached. Let's take a break from the hard stuff and talk about love. But our commentators Fee, Garland, and Thiselton are unanimous that this is not a sidebar. Gordon Fee calls it the crucial interlude.
Meaning you literally can't understand the argument without it.
Right. You physically cannot get from chapter 12 to chapter 14 without crossing the bridge of chapter 13. If you try to regulate spiritual gifts in chapter 14 without the ethic of love in chapter 13, you just end up with legalism or chaos.
David Garland uses a specific rhetorical term for this, doesn't he? A digressio.
Yes, and we need to be really careful with that word. In English, digression means wandering off topic. Oh, sorry, I digress. But in ancient rhetoric, a digressio was a calculated move. It was an amplification.
An amplification of the main point.
Exactly. You pause the specific argument, in this case, how to use tongues in prophecy, to shine a massive spotlight on the underlying principle that governs the whole thing. You lift the audience out of the weeds to show them the landscape, so that when you drop them back into the weeds in chapter 14, they can actually see where they are going.
So Paul isn't wandering at all. He's zooming out.
He's zooming out to show them that their entire value system is broken. The Corinthians thought spiritual gifts equaled spiritual maturity. If I speak in tongues, I have arrived. Paul inserts this chapter to say spiritual gifts minus love equals zero.
Eschatologically zero.
That's the exact phrase. It counts for absolutely nothing.
Let's introduce the guides who are going to help us unpack this. We have 3 distinct voices in our stack of research today.
We do, and they bring very different flavors and methodologies to the text.
First up, we have Gordon Fee, writing in the NICNT series.
Fee is a legend. If you know Fee, you know 2 things about him. 1, he is a premier textual critic. He knows the Greek manuscripts inside and out. And 2, he is a Pentecostal. He's a pneumatologist. He deeply loves the Holy Spirit and the gifts.
Which makes him a fascinating choice for Corinthians, because the Corinthians were arguably hyper-Pentecostal themselves.
Exactly. And that puts Fee in a really interesting position. He isn't anti-gift. He loves the gifts.
Yeah.
But he is surprisingly combative in this commentary. He is practically yelling at the Corinthians right alongside Paul. He identifies their core problem as over-realized eschatology.
Let's unpack that term quickly, because it comes up a lot in these deep dives. Over-realized eschatology.
It basically means they thought they had already arrived. They believed they were already living the angelic life of the resurrection. They thought they were kings ruling in God's kingdom right now. And if you think you're already an angel, you don't worry about earthly ethics. You don't worry about sexual morality. You don't worry about loving your neighbor because you're too busy speaking heavenly languages.
So Fee is our fighter here. He is popping their theological balloon.
He is the corrective pastoral voice. Then we have David Garland, writing in the BECNT. Garland is our rhetorical analyst.
He's the one watching the literary structure of the argument.
Yes. He treats the letter as a formal speech. He identifies chapter 13 as an encomium.
An encomium being a speech of praise.
Right, a speech of praise for a specific virtue or person. You would have an encomium for Caesar or an encomium for justice. Paul writes an encomium for love. But Garland points out the brilliant twist. Paul is using this praise of love as a depreciatory speech against the Corinthians.
Using praise to shame them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every single time Paul says love is patient, the Corinthians hear, you are impatient. Every time he says love is kind, they hear, you are cruel. It's a mirror that shows them their own ugliness by describing the beauty of love.
And finally, the heavy hitter, Anthony Thiselton.
Thiselton he's dense. He is the philosopher theologian of the group. He wrote the NIGTC commentary, which is notorious for being technically demanding. He brings in speech act theory, sociology, modern philosophy. He's constantly looking at the dynamic of the self versus the other.
So we have the spirit-focused fighter with Fee, the rhetorical strategist with Garland, and the philosopher of the self with Thiselton. Let's let them loose on the text. We've already talked about the acoustic jar in verse 1, but I want to linger on the tongues of angels bit.
If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels.
Right. Is Paul just being poetic here? Hyperbolic, like even if I spoke the most beautiful language imaginable?
Garland and Thiselton both argue strongly, no, this isn't just poetry. This is likely what the Corinthians believe they were actually doing.
They genuinely thought they were speaking angelic.
There is a lot of evidence in Jewish literature from that period. Texts like the Testament of Job indicating a belief that angels had their own distinct dialect. The Corinthians, with their over-realized eschatology, believed that when they spoke in tongues glossolalia, they were tapping into that literal heavenly frequency.
Which completely explains the arrogance. I mean, if I speak French, I'm just a guy who knows French. If I speak angel, I'm basically a divine being.
Exactly. It was the ultimate spiritual status symbol. And that's exactly why Fee connects the gong and symbol to pagan cults.
Ah, the pagan connection. Talk about that.
Corinth was a massive hub for the cults of Cybele and Dionysus. These are mystery religions. Their worship services were ecstatic, chaotic, and very loud. They involve frenzied dancing and the literal clashing of bronze cymbals and gongs to induce a trance state.
So Paul is making a direct cultural comparison.
He is effectively telling these super spiritual Christians, you think you are speaking the language of heaven. You think you are channeling Gabriel. Without love, you sound exactly like the pagan guys down the street getting drunk and banging on bronze plates for Dionysus.
That strips the holy veneer right off the practice.
It completely reduces their spiritual manifestation to mere noise, acoustic physics, and pagan clatter.
Let's move to verse 3. This is where we hit a massive speed bump in the text itself. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to be burned but have not love, I gain nothing.
The ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah.
Martyrdom.
But wait, I'm looking at Thiselton's notes here, and he flags a major textual variant. He says there is a serious disagreement in the ancient manuscripts about whether Paul actually wrote the word burned.
This is one of the most famous textual puzzles in the entire New Testament. It comes down to a single letter difference in the Greek text.
Spell it out for us.
On one side, you have the word kathisomai. That means to be burned. That is the reading you'll find in the King James, the NIV, the ESV.
Okay, the standard translation.
On the other side, you have kochashemai. That means that I may boast.
If I give my body that I may boast.
It sounds weird, doesn't it?
It sounds completely contradictory. Paul spends so much ink saying boasting is bad. Why would he say, if I give my body so I can boast?
That exact weirdness is why scholars think boast might actually be the original word Paul wrote.
Walk me through that logic, because it seems backward.
It's a foundational principle in textual criticism called lectio difficilior potior. The more difficult reading is the stronger one. Think about a scribe copying this text by hand in the year 300 AD. He sees, give my body that I may boast. He scratches his head. He thinks, well, that doesn't sound pious. Paul wouldn't say that. He probably meant burned, especially since Christians are literally getting burned at the stake right now under the Roman persecutions.
So the scribe fixes the text to match his current reality of martyrdom.
Exactly. It's an easy, almost subconscious mental slip. But if you look at the raw evidence, the oldest and best manuscripts we have, Papyrus 46, Codex Vaticanus, Codex Sinaiticus, they all have the boast reading.
So if we go with the oldest text, Paul actually wrote, if I hand over my body that I may boast. What does that even mean in context?
Garland provides a really great historical check here. He points out that in Paul's time, around 55 AD, Christian martyrdom by burning wasn't really a thing yet. That came later under Nero. So giving the body to be burned would have been a very strange, almost anachronistic hypothetical illustration for Paul to use.
So what does giving the body mean then, if not the stake?
Garland and Thiselton both suggest it refers to selling oneself into slavery.
Selling yourself.
It was an extreme form of charity in the ancient world. If you had absolutely no money left to give, you could sell your own body, your labor, your bodily freedom into slavery, and use the sale price to feed the starving poor.
That is intense. That is a level of physical sacrifice I can't even fully process.
It is the ultimate conceivable act of giving. You are completely liquidating your own liberty to help someone else survive. And here's where the boast reading suddenly makes perfect sense. If you did that, you would have a legitimate ground for boasting. You could rightly say, I have given absolutely everything.
It's not arrogant boasting. It's factual boasting. I did the ultimate good deed.
Right. But Paul's point is, even if you do that, even if you sell your freedom for the poor, even if you have the absolute right to boast in your extreme sacrifice, if the underlying motive wasn't love,
it's a zero.
It counts for nothing. This Theselton explains this brilliantly using his concept of the self. You can sell yourself into slavery for your own glory. You can be a martyr for your own reputation. Look at how holy I am. Look at what I gave up.
It's spiritual narcissism disguised as extreme charity.
Exactly. And that is terrifying. It means you cannot judge the heart by the external action. You can do the most heroic, self-effacing thing imaginable and still be an acoustic jar if the center of gravity is the self and not the other.
That leads us perfectly into the famous description of love in verses 4 through 7. This is the heart of the chapter. Love is patient, love is kind.
And here is where we desperately need to scrub our brains of all that wedding sentimentality.
How do we do that? What's the mechanism?
First, by realizing, as Thiselton basically shouts from the rooftops, that these are all verbs.
Not adjectives.
Right. In English, we translate it, love is patient. Patient acts as an adjective describing the noun love. But in the original Greek, Paul uses active verbs. He says literally, love patience, or love long tempers.
Love patience. That sounds incredibly ungrammatical in English, but I get the theological point. It's active.
It's kinetic. Love isn't a mood you fall into. It isn't a passive state of being. It is a way of actively moving through the world.
Let's look at some of these specific verbs because they're clearly targeted at the Corinthian problems. Take envy, for example.
Zealoi means to be jealous. But the root word has to do with heat. It literally means to boil.
To boil.
Think of that visceral feeling when you see someone else succeed where you failed. That physical heat in your chest. That seething, bubbling resentment. That is zelos. Paul says, love doesn't boil, it doesn't seethe when others are gifted or recognized.
And then we have puffed up physiutai.
Garland points out this is Paul's absolute favorite insult for the Corinthians. He uses it 6 different times in this one letter. It refers to a pair of bellows, the tool you use to blow air into a fire.
So they are literal windbags.
They're inflated, filled with hot air. Paul constantly contrasts this. Knowledge puffs up, it blows up like a balloon, but love builds up. One is a balloon, the other is a bricklayer.
A balloon is big, but it's completely empty. A building is big, but it's solid.
Exactly. And then we get to the absolute philosophical core of the whole section. Love does not seek its own. This is where Thiselton brings out the heavy artillery. He references the Swedish theologian Anders NIGREN, who wrote a massively influential book called Agape and Eros.
Break that down for us, because we usually just hear the youth group version, that Eros is romantic love and agape is God love.
Yeah, that's the Sunday school summary. NIGREN goes much deeper. He says Eros is acquisitive love. It is a love that desires an object because of the inherent value already in the object.
Like, I love that car because it's fast, or I love that person because they are beautiful and smart.
Right. The directional flow is inward. I want that valuable thing to enrich me. It is fundamentally self-centered, even if it looks externally like love.
And agape.
Agape is oblative love, or unmotivated love. It doesn't love the object because the object is already valuable. It creates value by loving the object.
Whoa. Say that again. It creates value by loving.
Think about God loving a sinner. God doesn't love us because we are so shiny and inherently valuable or morally good. We are messy. We are broken. God loves us, and in the very act of loving us, he confers value upon us. The flow is entirely outward.
So when Paul says love seeks not its own, he is defining agape as the only force in the universe that completely decenters the self.
Yes. If you are constantly asking, what do I get out of this relationship? You are operating in eros, not agape.
Let's look at verse 7, the 4 alls. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things.
This is where people get really tripped up pastorally. Believes all things. Does that mean love is inherently gullible?
Right. If I love you, do I have to believe you when you chronically lie to me? Do I have to be a doormat?
Thiselton is incredibly helpful here. He suggests we read these as logical negations. It's not that love is credulous and just believes every scam artist. It's that love never loses faith. It never stops hoping. It is a stubborn refusal to give in to ultimate cynicism about a person.
It's stubbornness in the best possible way.
And look at the very first one, bears all things. The Greek word is stigai.
Stigai.
It comes directly from the noun stege, which means a roof.
A roof, like on a house.
Exactly. Think about what a roof practically does. It takes the beating of the rain and the sun and the weather so that the people inside are kept safe. It covers.
So love is a protective covering.
Yes. Or, as some scholars suggest with this word, a roof covers up what is inside. It keeps secrets. It doesn't expose the household's shame to the public.
That's a really powerful image for a church community. Love doesn't blast your moral failures on Twitter. It puts a roof over them. It deals with them in the safety and privacy of the house.
Exactly. It rigorously protects the dignity of the other person, even while dealing with the reality of the sin.
Now we move to what is arguably the most controversial section of the chapter, maybe the whole book for some traditions, verses 8 through 13. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled.
The cessation of the gifts.
I grew up in a tradition, and I know many listeners probably did too, that taught this very clearly. The perfect in verse 10 refers to the Bible, the completed New Testament canon.
The argument goes, the supernatural gifts were temporary scaffolding. Once the New Testament was completely written, we had the perfect revelation, so we didn't need the partial stuff like prophecy or tongues anymore, so they ceased in the first century.
That's classic cessationism.
It is. But here is the commentary showdown moment. We have Fee, who's a Pentecostal. We have Garland, a Baptist evangelical. And Thiselton, an Anglican. And do you know what they all say about that specific view?
Let me guess. They don't buy it.
They reject it entirely.
All 3 of them.
All 3. And Fee in particular is just aggressive about it. He explicitly calls that interpretation impossible exegesis.
Impossible. That's really strong language for a scholarly commentary.
He argues that you cannot just cherry pick the phrase the perfect and make it about a book. You have to look at the temporal context Paul actually gives. Paul constantly contrasts the perfect with the now. And what is the now defined as?
Well, verse 12 says, "For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror."
And then we shall see.
Oh, what?
face to face.
Exactly. So Fee asks the cessationist, do you, right now, reading through the completed Bible, see God face to face? Do you know fully, even as you are fully known?
I mean, I know a lot about God from the text, but I definitely don't know him the way he comprehensively knows me. Then the perfect hasn't come yet. Fee, Garland, and Thiselton all agree on this baseline. To tele on the perfect is the eschaton. It is the end of the age, the second coming of Christ.
So the gifts, prophecy, tongues, words of knowledge, they are designed by God to last until Jesus actually returns.
That is the minimum consensus of these three scholars, regardless of their own denominational backgrounds. The gifts inherently belong to the between times.
Let's talk about that mirror analogy because it's fascinating historically. For now, we see in a mirror, dimly.
We moderns think of mirrors as perfect glass with a silver backing, a flawless reflection. But Corinth was actually famous for manufacturing bronze mirrors.
Polished metal.
Right. If you've ever looked at your reflection in a polished spoon or a chrome car bumper, you know it's okay. You can see it's you.
Oh.
But it's distorted. It's dim.
It's an indirect image.
And Thiselton points out the specific Greek phrase Paul uses here, an enigmati.
In an enigma.
Literally translated, in a riddle. This is a direct, undeniable callback to Numbers chapter 12, verse 8. Remember when Miriam and Aaron get mad at Moses and challenge his authority? God comes down in a pillar of cloud to defend Moses. He says, when there is a prophet among you, I speak to him in dreams and visions.
Indirectly.
But not so with my servant Moses. With him I speak mouth to mouth, or face to face.
So Paul is saying that right now, even with the absolute best New Testament prophecy, even with the most amazing preaching, we are still firmly in the riddle stage.
We are deciphering clues. We are looking at a wavy bronze reflection. But when the end actually comes, the mirror vanishes. We get the real thing. And you don't need a blurry, distorted photo of your wife when your wife is standing right in front of you.
That perfectly explains the child analogy, too. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, but when I became a man, I put childish ways behind me.
This is where Fee gets really corrective pastorally. He says, stop preaching this verse as a call to moral maturity.
Wait, really? I thought the whole point of Corinthians was grow up, you guys.
In other parts of the letter, absolutely yes. But right here, Fee argues the analogy isn't moral at all. It's eschatological.
Break that down for us.
Childhood isn't being immature and bratty. Childhood represents the present age of the church. We are supposed to be children right now. The gifts, tongues, prophecy are the appropriate God-given tools for our current childhood state.
So they aren't toys to be discarded because they are silly. They are tools that become obsolete because we eventually outgrow the need for them when the kingdom fully arrives.
Exactly. Adulthood is the age to come. You don't bring your elementary school math workbooks into your PhD defense. It's not that the workbooks were inherently bad. They were entirely necessary for that stage. But they're partial.
That brings us to the grand finale of the chapter, verse 13. And now abide faith, hope, love, these three. But the greatest of these is love.
This is the massive logical tussle that drives commentators absolutely crazy.
Why? It seems pretty straightforward on the surface.
Well, think about it deeply. If the perfect brings complete sight, if we see God face to face, why does faith abide? Hebrews says faith is the evidence of things not seen. If I am staring directly at God, I don't need faith anymore.
And hope. Romans says, who hopes for what he already has? If I'm physically in heaven, I don't need hope.
Exactly. So strictly logically speaking, faith and hope should completely cease right alongside prophecy and tongues. Only love should cross the finish line. But Paul explicitly says, now abide these three.
So how do our three guides solve it?
It's a bit of a showdown. Fee frankly struggles with it. He admits it's a severe logical difficulty. He essentially concludes that Paul is just being poetic and rhetorical, saying that faith, hope, and love are the fundamental atmosphere of Christian existence, so he just can't imagine them ever disappearing, even if the strict logic is tricky.
He punts a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Garland takes a very different angle. He says the word now isn't temporal, it's logical, like now in conclusion. He argues that faith as trust and hope as looking forward never actually end. Because even in eternity, we remain creatures. We will always trust God perfectly. We will always look forward to what God does next. We don't suddenly become omniscient. So the nature of faith and hope changes. It's not blind faith anymore, but the relational posture remains forever.
And Thiselton, how does the philosopher handle it?
Thiselton goes right back to the framework of self versus other. He absolutely agrees that faith and hope abide forever, But he argues love is the greatest strictly because of its directionality.
Directionality.
Think about it. Faith and hope, in a very real sense, are for the believer. I have faith. It grounds me. I have hope. It sustains me. They are essential, but they are instrumental virtues that benefit the self.
The love.
Love is the only one that is purely 100% for the other. And crucially, love is the only one of the three that actually describes the core nature of God himself.
Right. God doesn't have faith. God doesn't have hope.
But God is love. So when we love, we are actively participating in the eternal, uncreated nature of God in a way that faith and hope simply don't allow us to. Love is the ultimate bridge between the creature and the creator. It is the final bedrock reality.
That is profound. It decenters the self so completely that it actually aligns us with the divine nature.
And that is exactly why it survives the fire. That is why it survives the transition to the age to come. The self-centeredness doesn't make it through the door. Only the agape makes it through.
Let's try to land this plane with a big idea. We've covered acoustic jars, boiling envy, bronze mirrors, and the intricate logic of eternity. If we had to synthesize Fee, Garland, and Thiselton into one single sentence, what is 1 Corinthians 13 actually saying?
I think we could say this. Love is not a feeling to be felt, but the only eschatological way of life that decenters the self for the sake of the other, rendering it the only true gift that survives the transition into eternity.
The only gift that survives. That puts a really haunting perspective on literally everything else we do in church.
It really does strip away the fluff.
So let's talk application. And let's agree right now, no wedding applications.
Deal. Paul wasn't writing to a groom. He was writing to a highly dysfunctional church meeting.
So how does this apply to corporate worship, to the way you and I do church next Sunday?
The primary Corinthian application is about the ledger.
The laudaizatai term we touched on earlier, love keeps no record of wrongs.
It's a strict accounting term. It means writing something down in a ledger book to calculate a lingering debt. Thiselton points out that in any human community, we are constantly keeping score. He voted against my motion. She didn't thank me for the flowers. The pastor didn't shake my hand.
We all have these invisible mental spreadsheets of grievances.
And Paul says, agape shreds the spreadsheet. Love absolutely refuses to calculate the debt. Imagine a church business meeting where literally no one is keeping score.
It would be a complete revolution.
And then there's the puffed up application we need to consider.
The bellows, the hot air.
Right. In the modern church, we often drastically value competence over character. We actively look for the acoustic jars. Who is the most polished speaker? Who is the most raw charisma? Who can amplify the church's brand the loudest?
We hire the loudest bronze.
We really do. But Paul is unequivocally saying, if that person lacks the character of love, if they are envious, if they are self-seeking, if they are rude to staff, then their actual spiritual contribution is zero. Not low value. Zero.
We need to fundamentally measure leaders by the definition of verses 4 through 7, not by the tongues of men and angels in verse 1.
Precisely. It's a radical call to change our entire metric of spiritual success.
I want to end with a thought experiment for everyone listening. It's a bit of a provocation based on what we've discussed about the now and the then.
Go for it.
We spend so much of our Christian lives intensely cultivating our gifts. We go to seminary to learn to preach. We practice leadership dynamics. We read dense theology books to gain insight. And these are the childhood tools, right? They're good things.
Right. They are necessary for the now.
So here is the question you need to ask yourself. If the eschaton happened right now, if the sky rolled back and Jesus appeared, all those carefully cultivated gifts would instantly become obsolete. You wouldn't need to preach, you wouldn't need to cast vision, you wouldn't need your theological degrees because you'd be seeing face to face.
They would completely vanish.
So if all your impressive spiritual gifts were stripped away in an instant, would there be enough actual love left in your character for anyone to recognize you as a Christian?
That is the ultimate test, isn't it? Is your identity in the performance of the gift or in the posture of the heart?
Something to really wrestle with this week. Next time, we are going to take this theology of love and crash it headfirst into the chaotic reality of chapter 14. We're talking prophecy versus tongues, order versus chaos, and some incredibly difficult verses regarding the assembly.
That is going to be an absolute minefield to navigate.
And we will walk right through it together. Join us for that deep dive next time.